What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
So the story we're doing tonight is called The First 12 Hours. This is part 1. The call came in at 6:43 a.m. Domestic disturbance at 1247 Maple Street. Pretty standard for an early Thursday morning. Probably just another drunk who hadn't made it to bed yet. I've been on patrol since midnight, and the sun was just starting to peek through the October fog as I pulled up this 2-story colonial. The screaming hit me before I even got to my cruiser. Not your typical domestic dispute screaming. This was pure terror. I called for backup immediately, my hand instinctively moving to my holster as I approached the front door. "Police! Open up!" I shouted, pounding on the door with my free hand. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a wet, gurgling sound that made my skin crawl. Then came the thud of something heavy hitting the door. Wham, wham, wham. I didn't wait. 23 years in the force had taught me when to move, and every instinct was screaming at me to breach. I kicked the door open. Bam! The frame splitting as it flew open. The metallic smell of blood hit me like a wall. In the dim morning light filtered through the windows, I saw Mrs. Peterson. I recognized her from my neighborhood watch meetings, crouched over her husband's body. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She was feeding on him, her face buried in his throat, making these horrible slurping, chomping sounds. "Ma'am! Police! Step away from him now!" My weapon was already drawn, aimed at her head. She snapped up at the sound of my voice, and I nearly dropped my gun. Her face! Jesus Christ, her face! Her eyes were milky white, blood and gore dripping from her mouth, bits of flesh stuck in her teeth. She moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. 1 second she was on the floor, the next she was launching herself at me, crossing 15 feet in a single bound. I fired twice. Bang! Bang! Center mass. The bullets hit her square on the chest, but she didn't even flinch. I backpedaled, squeezing off another round as it caught her in the shoulder. Nothing. She was on me before I could fire again, her weight slamming me against the wall, her teeth snapping inches from my face, that horrible mouth trying to tear into me. The strength in her was impossible. This 50-year-old woman who had baked cookies for the school fundraiser was suddenly as strong as a linebacker. Pure instinct saved my life. As she lunged for my throat, I managed to get my forearm under her chin, holding her back just enough. With my free hand, I drew my backup weapon, a small .380 from my ankle holster, and pressed it against her temple. Bang! The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Mrs. Peterson went limp immediately, her body crumpling to the floor. My hands were shaking as I called it in. "Officer needs assistance. Shots fired. Multiple victims down at 1247 Maple." That's when I heard more screaming from outside, and car alarms, and more gunshots in the distance. I ran to the cruiser, grabbing the shotgun from the rack as I checked the radio. All I could hear was chaos. Multiple officers calling in similar situations across the city. Reports of violent attacks, suspects displaying unusual strength and aggression, not responding to pain compliance or even lethal force unless shot in the head. By 7:30 a.m., dispatch had gone dark. My phone was flooded with emergency alerts telling me to stay inside, lock their doors, avoid contact with infected individuals. The streets were filled with people trying to flee, and with them, the infected. They moved like Olympic sprinters, running down anyone too slow to escape, and every person they caught became one of them within minutes. I had used up half my shotgun shells by 8 a.m., saving 3 different families from their turned neighbors. Each time, only headshots worked. Anything else just slowed them down for a second or two. I'd seen enough zombie movies to know what this was, but my brain kept refusing to accept it. This wasn't supposed to be real. This was supposed to be fiction. But as I sat in my cruiser, watching a father turn and tear into his own children right in front of me, I knew our world had changed forever, and we were only a few hours in. Part 2. By 9 a.m., I had abandoned my patrol route entirely. Department protocol meant nothing when civilization was crumbling around us. The last coherent transmission I'd received from Lieutenant Rodriguez, ordering all units to fall back to the station. That was 40 minutes ago, right before a scream cut her off mid-sentence. I wasn't heading to the station. I'd seen the traffic cameras through my cruiser's laptop. The whole area was overrun. Hundreds of infected swarming the streets, chasing down anything that moved. The station had been one of the first places people ran for help, and that many people in place? It was a buffet for those things. Instead, I found myself driving toward Franklin Elementary. My daughter Emma was there, assuming they haven't evacuated yet. The streets were a nightmare of abandoned cars and chaos. I had to drive on sidewalks, through yards, anything to avoid the gridlock of crashed and empty vehicles. The infected ignored my cruiser when I kept moving. But the moment I slowed down, they'd sprint toward me like rabid cheetahs. I was 3 blocks from the school when I saw the buses. They were leaving. Thank God. They were evacuating. But behind them, Jesus, a horde of at least 30 infected were chasing the last bus, and they were gaining on it. The bus was struggling to navigate around all the abandoned cars. Without thinking, I flipped on my siren. The horde turned as one, their milky eyes fixing on my cruiser. I gunned the engine, driving straight at them. Most scattered, but 2 didn't move fast enough. The impact at 50 miles per hour sent them flying, and I felt the cruiser's front end crumple. But it worked, and the bus got away. The cruiser was done for, though. Steam poured from the hood, and the engine made a sound like marbles in a blender. I grabbed my shotgun, my bag of spare ammo, and my riot gear from the trunk. The helmet and pads had already saved my life twice this morning. These things love to tackle their prey. As I oriented myself, trying to figure out my next move, my radio crackled to life. Through the static, I heard fragments of a military broadcast. They were establishing a safe zone at Memorial Stadium, with helicopter evacuations for civilians. But they were giving a 3-hour window before they closed the perimeter. The stadium was 4 miles away, on foot, through infected territory. Under normal circumstances, I could run it in about 40 minutes. These weren't normal circumstances. A scream from nearby made me spin around, shotgun raised. A teenage boy was sprinting toward me, an infected woman right on his heels. She was gaining on him with every step. I lined up the shot, letting them get closer. Had to make it count. I was down to 6 shells. The boy dove to the ground at the last second. Smart kid. This infected woman didn't even try to stop, running full tilt right into my sights. The shotgun roared, bang! And her head disappeared in a red mist. She dropped like a puppet with cut strings. You okay, kid? I helped him up. His breath was covered in ragged gasps. My mom! He pointed back the way they'd come. She turned right in front of me. We were trying to get out of the car and this thing bit her and... I'm heading to the stadium. I cut him off. No time for grief now. You can come with me, but we have to move fast. What's your name? Tyler. He was already checking the magazine of a small pistol he pulled from his waistband. At my raised eyebrow, he added, My dad's a range instructor. I know how to use it. It was barely 10 a.m., and here I was, deputizing a teenager for a death march through zombie-infested streets. But we didn't have a choice. The evacuation window was closing, and the infected were getting more numerous by the minute. Stay close. Keep quiet. And if I tell you to run, you run. Got it? Tyler nodded. eyes hard with the look of someone who'd aged years and hours. Together we started moving, keeping to the shadows of buildings, avoiding the main streets. Behind us, the sound of screams and gunfire echoed through the city. Ahead of us lay 4 miles of urban hell. And somewhere out there, Emma's school bus was heading for the stadium too. At least, I prayed it was. Because if it wasn't, the monsters roaming our streets weren't the only thing I'd be willing to kill to find her. Part 3. The first mile was deceptively easy. Tyler and I struck to the back alleys, moving fast but quiet. The kid had good instincts. He watched our six without being told, kept low when he needed to, and hadn't fired his gun once. Every shot was like ringing a dinner bell for these things, so we'd been relying on stealth and my combat knife when we couldn't avoid them entirely. It was approaching 10:45 a.m. when we hit Harrison Street. There was no way around it. We needed to cross the 4-lane road to continue toward the stadium. From behind a dumpster, we watched the infected moving in small packs, like wolves hunting. They'd snap their heads toward any sound, then sprint to investigate with terrifying speed. "We'll never make it across," Tyler whispered, watching an infected teenager run down a fleeing man 2 blocks away. The wet sounds of feeding that followed made the kid turn away. I was about to suggest backtracking when we heard the helicopter. It was flying low, headed for the stadium. The infected all turned toward the sound, several of them actually chasing it on foot. Our chance. "Now!" I hissed, and we broke cover. We were halfway across when the screech of tires made me turn. A pickup truck came barreling down Harrison, plowing through infected like bowling pins. The driver was screaming what sounded like a prayer or a war cry. Couldn't tell which. Behind the truck, at least 50 infected gave chase, drawn by the noise. The truck clipped an abandoned SUV and flipped, rolling 3 times before crashing into a storefront. The driver's screams turned to agony. The horde descended on the wreck like piranha. "Run!" I shoved Tyler toward the nearest building, a small bank. Its glass doors were shattered, but it looked empty. We sprinted inside just as the first of the infected noticed us. I slammed the emergency security gate down behind us, the steel barrier buying us precious seconds. "The vault!" Tyler pointed. Thank God for range instructors' kids and their tactical minds. We sealed ourselves inside just as the infected reached the gate. In the dim emergency lighting, we caught our breath and checked our weapons. Through the vault's thick walls, we could hear them trying to get in, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the bank. "How long do we wait?" Tyler asked, checking his phone. No signal, obviously. I checked my watch. 11:05 a.m. The stadium evacuation window would close at 1 p.m. We still had 2.5 miles to go. 15 minutes, I said. Let them spread out looking for other prey. They're like sharks, always moving, always hunting. While we waited, I did a proper inventory. 4 shotgun shells left. My pistol was full, but I only had 1 spare magazine. Tyler had half a mag left in his .22. Better than nothing, but not by much. The combat knife was notched but clean. I'd learned earlier that their blood was just as infectious as their bites. Tyler broke the silence. "My dad was supposed to pick me up early today. Dentist appointment. He's probably at the range, wondering where I am." I recognized the look in his eyes, the same one I had every time I thought about Emma. "We'll find him," I lied. "It's what you do. It's what my fellow officers told my families of victims 1,000 times before. Sometimes hope is more important than the truth." At 11:20, the shrieking outside had faded. I cracked the vault door. The bank lobby was empty. Through the shattered windows, I could see maybe a dozen infected spread out along the street. Not great, but better than 50. "Back door," I whispered. "Through the break room. Ready?" Tyler nodded, gripping his pistol with practiced ease. His hands weren't shaking anymore. I wasn't sure if this was good or horrible. We moved through the bank silently, past family photos on desk walls that were never going to be their owners again. The break room had a half-eaten birthday cake on the table. "Happy birthday, Carol," written in blue frosting. Carol was crumpled in the corner, her party hat still on, half her throat missing. Her fingers twitched as we passed. I put my knife through her temple without breaking stride. No sound, no hesitation. Tyler didn't even flinch. The world had changed us all in just a few hours. The back door opened into an alley. The stadium was visible now, its upper deck rising above the building to the northeast. Black Hawk helicopters circled like angry wasps. We could make it. We had to make it. Then Tyler's phone chirped. A text finally coming through. The sound echoed off the alley walls, and the infected began to run. Part 4. They came at us from both ends of the alley. 8, maybe 10 of them. Their feet barely seemed to touch the ground as they sprinted toward us, faces twisted in that permanent expression of hunger and rage. "Ladder!" Tyler pointed to a fire escape above us. The bottom section was pulled up, just out of reach. I fired my shotgun at the closest infected. Bang! Buying us seconds. "I'll boost you," I said, dropping to one knee and lacing my fingers together. "Pull me up after." Tyler didn't argue. He stepped into my hands, and I launched him upward. The kid caught the bottom rung and scrambled up with the desperation of the hunted. I fired again. Bam! Taking the head off an infected businessman still wearing his Bluetooth earpiece. 2 shells left. "Jump!" Tyler had lowered the ladder. I could hear him firing his .22 behind me, the small caliber shots doing little more than catching their attention. I jumped, catching the lowest rung as infected hands grasped at my boots. Climbing with a shotgun was awkward, but I wasn't about to drop it. We made it to the second floor, landing just as they started climbing the walls. Literally climbing, their fingers digging into the brick like it was clay. "Inside!" I smashed the window with the shotgun butt. Psh! And we dove through an empty office. Cubicles stretched out before us in a maze of productivity that would never matter again. We ran for the far side of the building. Behind us, infected poured through the broken window. A printer cart made a decent barricade for the cubicle entrance, buying us precious seconds. "Door code!" Tyler pointed at the keypad on the stairwell door. Red light. No getting through. An infected in a blood-stained postal uniform launched itself out the cubicle walls, landing on a desk 10 feet away. I fired. Bang! Catching it mid-leap. 1 shell left. "This way!" I spotted the sign for the sky bridge connected to the next building. Standard feature of the business district, letting office workers move between buildings without going outside. Right now, it was a godsend. We sprinted across the enclosed bridge, 4 stories above the street. Below us, hundreds of infected roamed, drawn by the sounds of fighting. The whole city was falling. A body slammed into the glass beside us. An infected had launched itself from the building we'd just left. The reinforced glass held, but spiderweb cracks appeared. Behind us, more infected were flooding the bridge. "Other side, go!" We reached the far door, locked. I didn't hesitate, firing my last shell point blank at the lock. Bang! The door burst open, and we stumbled through into what looked like an accounting firm. "Help! Please!" The voice came from behind a desk. A woman crouched there, pressing a bloody hand against her shoulder. Bite marks. Fresh ones. "How long?" I asked, raising my pistol. 20 minutes, she whispered. "Please, my kids are at the stadium. I was trying to..." Her eyes started to glaze over. The change was coming. I put her down with a single shot. Bang! Tyler didn't judge. He'd seen enough by now to understand mercy when he saw it. We found the building's stairwell. No keypad on this one. Down we went, emerging into an underground parking garage. The emergency lights cast everything in a red glow, like we were running through hell itself. My watch read 12:10 p.m., 50 minutes until the evacuation window closed. The stadium was less than a mile away now. We could hear the helicopters growing louder. Almost there. Then the garage door opened, fluorescent lights spilling in along with the sound of engines. 3 motorcycles roared into the garage, their riders whooping and firing guns in the air. "Fresh meat!" one of them yelled, spotting us. They weren't infected. Sometimes the monsters aren't the ones you expect. I grabbed Tyler and pulled him behind a concrete pillar as bullets sparked off the walls around us. Ping, 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 ping! The bikers laughed, engines roaring. "Come on out, cop!" They'd spotted my uniform. "World's over. No more laws." I checked my pistol. 6 rounds in the magazine. 1 in the chamber. Tyler had maybe 4 rounds left in his .22. And somewhere above us, the infected would be coming, drawn by the noise. The hunt wasn't over yet. Part 5. The bikers spread out, engines echoing through the garage. Classic flanking maneuver. These weren't just random thugs. They moved like they had training. Maybe ex-military decided the apocalypse was their chance to go feral. "We got ourselves a pig and a piglet!" The leader's voice bounced off the concrete walls. "Tell you what, leave your weapons and supplies, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here." A lie. The kind of lie that ended with a bullet in the back. I had heard enough of them in my years in the force. I whispered to Tyler, "When I start shooting, run for the street exit. Don't stop." "I'm not leaving you," he hissed back. "Yes, you are. Find your dad. Find my daughter. Tell Emma, her father." The ceiling above us exploded. Kaboom! Infected poured through like angry wasps from a broken nest, dropping 20 feet and landing on their feet. The bikers' gunfire had drawn them. The garage erupted in chaos. "Light 'em up!" the lead biker screamed. His gang opened fire on the infected, but there were too many. The infected crossed the distance faster than they could aim, swarming the first motorcycle. The rider's scream was brief. I grabbed Tyler and ran, using the chaos as cover. Behind us, the bikers' bravado turned to terror. Motorcycles crashed. Guns fired. Men died. We burst out onto the street into blinding light. 12:35 p.m. The stadium loomed ahead. Less than half a mile now. Black Hawk circled lower, and we could hear the military's warning sirens. "Sprint!" I pushed Tyler ahead of me. "Don't look back!" We ran, past abandoned cars and broken storefront windows, past bodies. So many bodies. Past an elementary school bus, empty except for a single bloody hand mark on the window. I forced myself not to look too closely at it. The infected came from everywhere, drawn by our footsteps, our breathing, our very existence. They poured from buildings and alleys like a flood of hunger and rage. Almost there! The stadium's main entrance was ahead. Military barriers were set up, soldiers with heavy weapons scanning for threats, for survivors. My leg exploded in pain. I'd been so focused on the goal, I hadn't seen the piece of twisted metal sticking out from a wrecked car. Blood poured from my thigh. "Keep going!" I shoved Tyler forward as I stumbled. The infected were closing in, drawn by the scent of fresh blood. "No!" Tyler turned back, grabbed my arm. This brave, stupid kid. I drew my pistol, firing at the closest infected. 5 rounds left. Each shot found its mark. The range instructor's kid had learned well, but there were too many. Then the world exploded in sound and light. A Black Hawk swooped low, its miniguns tearing the horde apart. Brrr! Marines rappelled down on fast ropes, creating a perimeter around us. Professional, efficient, beautiful. "Move, move, move!" They half carried, half dragged us the last 100 yards. Through the barricades, past the checkpoints, into the stadium. Inside was a scene from a refugee camp. Thousands of survivors huddled in stands. Medical tents in the field. Military efficiency mixing with human desperation. "Dad!" Tyler's cry made me turn. A man in a range instructor's clothes swept to him in a crushing hug. They'd made it. They'd found each other. "Daddy!" The voice hit me like a physical force. Emma burst from a group of evacuated students, running towards me. She was alive. She was safe. I caught her in my arms, my leg forgotten, my wounds meaningless. I knew you'd come, she whispered into my chest. I knew you'd find me. The stadium speakers crackled. Attention! Evacuation window closes in 5 minutes. All civilians must proceed to helicopter landing zones immediately. I looked at my watch one last time. 12:55 p.m. We'd made it. Barely. Outside the stadium walls, the city burned. The infected ran wild. The world we'd known was gone. But we'd survived the first 12 hours. And sometimes, survival is enough. Tyler and his father joined us in the evacuation line. The boy who'd become a warrior in the space of a morning, who'd helped save my life, and whom I'd helped save in return. Where do we go now? Emma asked as we climbed to the helicopter. I held her close as we lifted off, watching our city disappear beneath us. Somewhere safe, I lied. Because that's what fathers do. Because sometimes hope is more important than truth. The first 12 hours were over. The rest of our lives were just beginning. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. Come back next time for some more scary stories. And as always, remember to face your fears.